Hi there, it's Glenn with War for the West with a quick alternative hypothesis and scenario on the actions of the Biden administration with the ATACMS. I want to leave you with some hope here. By the way, I'm not saying this is true or so. I'm just saying it's a potential scenario that could be better than we think. First off, I want to start by analyzing what Putin actually said. He's simply saying that any power that helps Ukraine be a threat to the Russian homeland is subject to being an object of a target of their warring activities. Right? That's the first part of what he's saying. That was already true. That in itself is nothing new. What he's done is change the threshold to make it clear that he would use tactical nukes or other nuclear weapons to accomplish that goal of pushing back whoever was working on their their border and seeming to maybe have success making incursions on the homeland. Yep. That's no different from the policy that the Russians have had for a very long time in terms of overall zeitgeist. They will always use nukes against anybody who they couldn't stop from invading their homeland. This is more precise, and what they're making clear is the first point, really, if you think about it. Then it's that by helping them, we make ourselves party to war. If you didn't know that, wake up. This is not news either. Okay, what's the big picture here? Where is the war at right now? The war is in a bit of a stalemate. Even though the Russians are advancing on the Eastern Front and they are surrounding the Ukrainian troops in Kursk. By the way, half the troop force the Ukrainians had in Kursk is already gone. The Ukrainians are surrounding them, and this is a much bigger operation than I initially realized in Kursk. The Ukrainians put a ridiculous amount of force and modern equipment and best troops in there. By the way, taking troops away from their main line of conflict, which the Russians decided they wouldn't do, so they wouldn't lose the advantage they had. So think about the strategic mistake the Ukrainians have made. It's just they're so silly. This thing into Kursk, this was all optics to try and show that they could extract a price from Russia somehow and create negotiating leverage. Well, all it did was give, by taking forces away from the east, where Ukraine is already losing badly, doesn't have enough force to stop the Russians. I hope you know that. Okay, that's the case. Then by taking these best forces away and a lot of top equipment and putting into Kursk for this distraction, which any sound military analyst knew that the Russians wouldn't tolerate and had enough force to deal with eventually, and they're doing it. This is a really bad thing because it's given the Russians even more purchase, and they're advancing even faster right across eastern Ukraine, taking more and more territorial time, killing more and more Ukrainian soldiers, and it's a meat grinder down there. So they did themselves no favor with this, and now they're losing in Kursk. It was harder than people like me thought it was going to be initially. I didn't realize how much the size of the forces the Ukrainians put up there. I couldn't visualize it. They put like all those men and equipment up there, but they did. I don't know if this is going to last another 60 days. They'll be gone. They will be out of Russia, and that's all going to be over. So that was a total waste of time. What it's done is it's angered Russia a lot, and to no good end. It's just caused them more losses, more suffering, more problems. It does cost the Russians to have to find the troops to send there and get the units out and really deploy like they basically have to create a new sort of brigade or whatever level it is that had to get mobile and go there, which they didn't plan on doing. That's why it took so long for them to do it. But they're there now, and they're eating the Ukrainians alive. They're just slaughtering them. By the way, you won't hear that on the news because nobody cares apparently in our great liberal international order when Ukrainian people. I mean, they're only white men, and Christians. Like when white male Christians die, nobody really cares. I've noticed. So now, what's the next part of the strategic situation here? Well, we enter with the ATACMS. What is this? This is a medium-range missile that goes 100 to 190 miles. It's not a long-range missile. Some people run around saying it's a long-range missile. It is a highly mobile. That's the key part of it. Highly accurate is another key part of it. Missile system that can be very effective against Russian defenses. Not utterly, by the way, from what I understand. In the strike the first strike Ukraine made, at least half of the missiles were shot out of the air by the Russians. And what happens with these munitions? It's always a game of measure countermeasure. So you can count on the Russians getting better at intercepting ATACMS. The ATACMS have been there a long time. We just haven't let them shoot them and give them the munitions to do so. They have been flying missiles, shooting missiles and flying cruise missiles into Russia already. So it's not as though they haven't gone across the border. So what's the really big difference here? And this is why Russia is getting so freaked out. And this is where the different scenario emerges that I want you to consider. These ATACMS are very interesting weapons. In fact, the other intermediate missiles that are going to be brought in, there's a British one and a Dutch one, or whatever. It doesn't matter where they're coming from. What these enable the Ukrainians to do, which they cannot do now, is launch effective missile attacks behind the Russian lines. Imagine the Ukrainian war. Most of the war is happening on the eastern side of Ukraine, right? And the Ukrainians are facing them from the west, and the Russians are facing them from the east. Well, you can imagine like 100 miles behind that line into Russia. That's where all the logistics are. That's where the air bases are that Russia launches its airstrikes from. That's where its radars are and surface-to-air missile defenses are, and all these other things are in that band right behind the line of conflict, right? And what they're able to do now is attack that. I don't want to say at will, but like they can destroy the surface, like the air defense systems and the radars with these things, right? And I think they already began that yesterday. And so what would that do? This would change the strategic dynamics of this war, folks. And again, I'm just being fact-based because I've been following military affairs my whole life. I understand escalation ladders. I don't use that language because I think that's really for like the professionals. I don't need to use that language to describe these things, but there is an escalation going on. And what happens is, but this escalation is strategic. It's unlike the stupid incursion to Kursk, which was not strategic at all and weakened the Ukrainians. This would make the Russians have to move back all their logistics and those air bases and their surface, their air defense back another 100, 150 kilometers from the front line to keep them safe. This would prevent them from securing the airspace over the front lines effectively. They'd have a much less, what's the right word? Complete air defense umbrella over the battle space. Air power is everything today, right? You can't fight on the ground without air power. So their control of the airspace is really crucial. This gets limited by that. They also would have much more difficult times responding quickly, logistically to the front, resupply, adjusting, maneuver. It just would slow everything down quite a bit and would really make a difference to Russia. Now, is it going to make Russia lose the war? Ultimately, I don't think it makes Russia lose the war. It will slow them down a lot. And what it would do is it creates some leverage. And this is what I think everybody's missing that you really need to look at. Some other commentators have said this, so it's not just an original idea of me, but I've been thinking this all through on my own, so here's my version of it. I think that Biden, ever since he got canned by Kamala, remember Kamala was a key driver of canning him. What did Pelosi and everybody go in with? They went in with the threat of the 25th Amendment. That can only get executed by Kamala, leading the cabinet against him. Obama couldn't do it, so he hated Kamala. He knew she was going to lose. By the way, Joe knew he was going to lose. That's why he said yes eventually, stop fighting. Because apparently internal polling showed he was going to lose 49 states. Isn't anybody surprised by that? After the debate, his support for him completely collapsed across the country. He didn't want to face that because he's an arrogant guy and he's Joe Biden. But he's not a complete fool. The other thing Joe was on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee for like 35 years or something like that. And, while I don't like Joe Biden, what I cannot say is that he doesn't know something about foreign policy. Now, he's lost a couple of steps, but, I don't know if you've known people in his phase of sort of cognitive decline. They have good hours each day. Like, where they're almost like their normal selves, just like an old man version of their normal selves. A little slower, a little more stumbly, but like coherent, able to think, able to understand what you're saying to them. I think Joe has times like that. And by the way, the whole time along while he was in the White House, everybody's saying he's senile and completely gone, I was hearing reports from other people that he was, he had periods where he was, highly functional for the day, but it was short. And, if he got tired, something happened, he could get thrown off. And some days he could go long, and some days, it was much more problematic. But Joe is not completely non-compos mentis. Also, remember, Jill Biden is one of the most vicious human beings on the face of the earth. So I think basically, like as everybody else has been saying, Biden what's the word? He promotes, he endorses, Kamala as a way to screw them because he knows she can't win. And he knows Trump's going to get in. And I think the other thing I'm hearing from everything I'm reading is that Biden has ordered his minions to do a very smooth transition and cooperate to every extent possible with the incoming Trump administration, isn't tolerating any of the tomfoolery that the Obama admin did. They were very difficult to deal with the Trump folks. They were total jerks to them. None of that's going on in this. Joe looked very happy to see him the other day. I think Joe is very happy to have screwed these people. And I think the one area of policy that Joe's got some understanding in is foreign policy. I'm not saying he always made the right decisions. By the way, I do want to go back on one thing on Joe Biden. Strange for me to defend Joe Biden, but, I just know the facts of what he believed in. He always thought that Iraq should be broken up into a Kurdish state, a Sunni state, and a Shia state. Imagine if we had done that. Imagine different outcomes trying to keep one. I mean, what would the Iraqis get? The tiny little Sunni Shia part in the bottom. They would be controlling the whole country. We're idiots. The Kurds deserve a country, by the way, more than anybody on earth. Just if you read their history, and nothing against the Jews, but like the Jews ain't got nothing on the Kurds instead of a claim to them a homeland. It's really ridiculous that they don't have their own country. Joe saw that. He was ignored, told a fool he's wrong about everything. Joe wasn't wrong about everything. He wasn't right about everything. He's not some foreign policy guru, but not a complete idiot. I think he could look at this situation and see, my God, what a mess this Ukraine war has been. I think he's got people in his administration who aren't just sort of hacks, but I think there are some patriots. I also think he has an old network in the Senate, a lot of people in the foreign policy community from his days there that has nothing to do with Obama people, that has nothing to do with Valerie Jarrett, does nothing to do with any of the West Coast machine that Kamala represents, right? But actual serious people, not Nancy Pelosi, yeah? And whether, we want to admit it or not, the Senate has always had a more thoughtful approach on foreign policy and deep relations with a lot of foreign policy thinkers inside and outside of government. So I think that what he's done is figure out a way to give Trump some leverage so we can come to some kind of way to settle this war. I think it's possible he's done that. Let me be very careful. I'm not saying he's definitely done that. I think you could look at all this fact set and see, because what does this do? And by the way, they're not going to launch nukes over this, folks. They're not going to do it. I bet you Ukrainians have been told under no uncertain terms that they cannot hit Moscow and some other places with these missiles. But even if they do, still, I don't see Putin going to nuclear war by Christmas. By the way, that was said by somebody who's not even with the Russian government anymore, right? And what they're trying to do is actually play some games with us over here. See, they're very sophisticated PR and propaganda-wise. I think they know if they ring that bell, they get a lot of MAGA people who really don't do strategic analysis. I think there's a lot of great people on Trump's team who do strategic analysis. I'm not worried about them. I'm talking about a lot of you guys on Twitter, a lot of you people. I think they know people who will just go like, we just don't want war. Stop it, stop it, stop it, stop it. And don't get played like this. And even though I'm totally against this war, folks, I'm totally against liberal international order for a million different reasons. So I'm not with this. But I'm talking about this is, this is the situation we're in now, as I'm trying to describe to you, right? And I think it's entirely possible that what he's done here could really be helpful. Because Trump could never escalate to de-escalate like that. That's Trumpian. By the way, that's art of the deal. De-escalate, do the unexpected, be aggressive, withdraw. That's the way he negotiates. It's very effective for him. I've learned a little bit from actually working with him. Watching him work. Excuse me, not working. What am I saying? Watching him work, I mean. And I think that what this does is it creates something that we can give back on, or we can hang over their heads. And the reason it works is it's a real strategic loss for the Russians to have to back off like this. Now, how does this play out? Well, I don't know how it's going to play out. There's several things that could happen. First of all, the Russian response so far has been devastating. Can Kiev and Ukraine hold out long enough to keep doing this to make them actually move back? Because I think, by the way, they can't do the same amount of attacking they're due if they have to move back. So I think they're trying to prevent any more of this to go on right now. The question is, can the Russians actually accomplish that feat? That's the remaining question. If they can actually just escalate and take the rest of Ukraine now, or really reduce its ability to fight anymore, and even to use the ATACMS or anything, then this would turn out to be a very, very, very bad strategy. If, as a lot of people think, it doesn't give either of them a decisive victory, like it's very hard for Russia just to turn on all the gas now and take the rest, as much as Ukraine would need to control it. I just don't. So that's the part I don't know, folks. But that's those are the dynamics to think about. Those are the variables you need to consider. How much force does Russia have? If they don't have enough, this actually gives Trump something to negotiate. Because here's the last thing to think about: the war was at a stalemate. Ukraine was not going to accept the current lines of conflict to settle the war on, and Russia has gotten so angry now. I think in some ways justifiably, in other ways not justifiably, but whatever. And the Russian people at some of the things that have gone on. They're like, nope, we're going to keep all this. And if you like, we can keep fighting. But they're not in a mood to negotiate because the Russians are winning. You see, the Russians are winning right now. So we have to create a feel that the Russians are losing so they're willing to take some concessions in order to negotiate anything because the Ukrainians aren't going to accept what the Russians want. They're at a stalemate. So this is, by the way, this is escalate to de-escalate, right? You climb the escalate. This is an accepted foreign policy military strategy. You shouldn't be looking like it is so crazy. It's very dangerous. But it's something Trump could not do in the same way. Do you understand? I also think this is such an odd thing to do in a transition. And I think Biden is so focused on having a good transition that he wouldn't do this. Now, All that said, there's entirely possible there's other machinations, and they just want to make it impossible for Trump to settle the war because this is going to make Russia escalate now and do such crazy things the Ukrainians we can never negotiate with them. I think that's another possible scenario here, but I just don't think that jibes with Biden and sort of the way he's approached all this. Maybe that's a hopeful take, and not maybe that is a hopeful take. So here I am with a hopeful take. All right, thanks. I hope this has helped you at least see into this a little more, maybe start to make a little more sense of it, and you can figure out what's going to happen on your own here. Welcome all comments. I could easily be wrong here, but I'm not wrong in the way I'm analyzing it, the way I'm looking at the different aspects of this. I think it's a good way for you to try to understand some of it. Okay, thanks. Glenn with War for the West out.